Good morning, everybody. Who likes charts? Good. Your ship has come in. Okay, everybody ready? Well, I'm here with Congressman Jason Smith, who's the ranking member of the House Budget Committee, and we're going to put a fine point on this week. The good news for the American consumer, there's not going to be any more inflation in your stockings because of Build Back Better. I want to thank Senator Manchin and others for standing their ground. And my belief is that Build Back Better never gets better. It will never get better. You can't make this thing, you can't put lipstick on a pig. And when it comes to inflation and deficit spending, this thing is a monster pig. So let's start with this idea. Our Democratic colleagues say that the CBO score is fake. And she's growing on me, by the way. I think she does a good job. This is a fake CBO score that's not based on the actual bill that anybody is voting on. Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Okay. Next. Senator Durbin, one of my closest friends. He's a good guy. Senator Graham is making up numbers. It's Lindsey at his best. You know, he's waxing loyal followers of Donald Trump, who apparently must be the CBO. And Republicans have some preposterous number to quote on the air. We know what the cost is going to be, and it's nowhere near that. To my good friend, Senator Durbin, I promise you I'm not Svengali. Neither one of us have hold over CBO. We didn't make up the numbers. They analyzed the bill, and we'll talk about that later. But I find that the White House spokesperson and Senator Durbin are attacking the CBO because if they can't successfully pull that off, they're in trouble. Here's the problem with their attack on CBO. Feel like I'm on Wheel of Fortune here. Okay. There was another time where there was a different view of the CBO. The estimates from the CBO, which is really, as you know, the gold standard, no Republican or Democrat questions it. President Biden back in 2010. So I want the American people to know that this score from the CBO about the actual cost of the bill is not fake, it's real. The effect on the deficit is not fake, it's real. And so let's go talk about what they've said about this bill in terms of cost. President Biden said, "My Build Back Better agenda costs $0. My plans are fiscally responsible. They're fully paid for. They don't add a single penny to the deficit." Vice President Harris, "Let me be clear. Our Build Back Better Act is fully paid for. It reduces the deficit by more than $100 billion over the next 10 years, December the 2nd, 2021. Treasury Secretary Yellen, "Build Back Better is fully paid for, or even more than fully paid for." Speaker Pelosi, "Build Back Better is solidly paid for." Senator Sanders, Bernie Sanders, "The reconciliation bill is paid for in its entirety. It will not have an impact on inflation." White House Chief of Staff Ron Klein, "This package adds nothing to the debt." Nothing to the debt. Well, all lies. It is not paid for, and if you don't believe me, let's look at what CBO said. CBO said that the deficit will increase by $3 trillion. So when the President, the Vice President, the Treasury Secretary, the Speaker of the House, Senator Bernie Sanders is Chairman of the Budget Committee, and the Chief of Staff to President Biden, Ron Klein, say it is fully paid for, it will not add to the deficit, CBO says that's not true. CBO says it will add $3 trillion to the deficit. Who do you believe, them or CBO? And what happened here? Jason and myself asked the Congressional Budget Office to score Build Back Better, assuming that the 17 programs with a sunset clause would actually stay in being for 10 years, which is reality. Ronald Reagan said the closest thing to immortality on earth is a government program. So we all know that these spending programs Democrats are trying to put in Build Back Better, they don't want them to go away. And if history's any judge, they won't go away. So when the CBO looked at these programs being spending for 10 years, not 1, 2, or 3 years, it went to $4.9 trillion. The $1.75 trillion number is a result of budget gimmicks. They artificially limit the length of the programs to get the number to 1.75 trillion over 10. If you do away with the gimmicks, and Joe Manchin said, let's look at what Joe Manchin said. Do we have that quote? And this is one of the reasons that we decided to ask CBO to look at the bill. What I see are shell games and budget gimmicks that make the real cost of this so-called $1.75 trillion bill estimate to be twice as high if the programs are extended or made permanent. That is a recipe for economic crisis. None of us should ever misrepresent to the American people what the real cost of the legislation is. So to my Democratic colleagues, you have been misrepresenting to the American people the real cost of this bill, and CBO scored the bill without gimmicks, and it went from, put it back, 1.75 to almost $5 trillion. It is not paid for. Without gimmicks, it adds $3 trillion to the deficit. So I think Build Back Better is dead, not for just 2021, but forever. If my Democratic colleagues who have been talking about what they won't do hold firm. If you really don't want to vote for a bill that adds to the deficit, then you can't vote for Build Back Better. If you don't want to vote for a bill full of gimmicks, you cannot vote for Build Back Better. If you try to raise taxes to pay for the $3 trillion deficit spending, then you're going to have to massively increase taxes on an economy that doesn't need any more tax increases. $5 trillion is the true cost because these programs never go away. I can't think of a worse recipe for inflation than passing a bill that would spend $5 trillion. Build Back Better declares war on fossil fuels. The Green New Deal component of Build Back Better will increase gas prices, I think, by $1 a gallon at a time when it's hurting working people already. So Build Back Better, when it comes to child care, collapses child care as we know it. It makes it hard for the private sector to stay in the child care business. It mandates increased cost, and it virtually is impossible for religious institutions to participate in the child care program drafted by Build Back Better. So they're talking $12,000 to $13,000 additional cost to the consumer from child care because they replaced the private sector with a government-run child care. This bill is inflationary. This bill blows a $3 trillion hole in already a growing deficit. It is not paid for. This bill is twice the cost being advertised. This bill does not pass scrutiny. And it's not me saying that. It's the Congressional Budget Office that used to be the gold standard. What have I learned? If a policy or a rule gets in the way of the liberal agenda, it will be shredded. Senator Warren is calling for packing the court because she doesn't like the makeup of the court. Democrats are talking about eliminating the Electoral College because it gets in the way of them winning. We're talking about adding 2 new states because the 50 states we have is not enough, apparently, to deliver the liberal agenda they're all hoping and praying for. Now it's the CBO. The CBO went from the gold standard to fake, not because of any change at the CBO, because of the change in Joe Biden. The Joe Biden of 2010 doesn't exist. The Democratic Party of just a few years ago doesn't exist. These folks are on a mission to grow this government, to replace the private sector everywhere they can, and they see this as their last best chance. They're acting as if there's a mandate for all this. There's not. This is a 50-50 Senate. The only thing between the American public and an inflation bomb called Build Back Better, an unpaid for bill that adds $3 trillion to the deficit, is a handful of Democratic senators. And here's what I would tell my Democratic colleagues. The public is with you. West Virginia is with you. It is not only time to have a timeout on this bill. It's a time to bury this bill. This bill doesn't get better over time. There are some provisions in this bill that maybe we could have a bipartisan agreement on once inflation calms down and cools down. I don't mind having that discussion, but right now is not the time to add any more federal spending, growing the government, and creating a problem for inflation. So I'm hoping that the highest inflation rate in 40 years, combined with a CBO score, will stop the madness. That come back next year and let's focus on two things: lowering inflation and rebuilding the supply chain, rather than expanding the government in a way that will do more harm than good. Congressman Smith has been an indispensable partner in getting the CBO to score the bill without gimmicks, and I will now turn it over to him, and I appreciate all your leadership in the House.
I want to thank Senator Graham for your partnership on getting the real score of the Build Back Better. We've heard a lot of conversation from the White House, Joe Biden's White House, Speaker Pelosi, and they've just not been honest with the American people. They've not been honest with the members of Congress. They originally started out with a $3.5 trillion piece of legislation, and then they needed to scale it down to $1.75 trillion on paper. But we knew with the budget gimmicks what they were doing, that they were just changing sunsets. They weren't phasing out any programs. And when you ask them, do you not want to make these various programs permanent? No, we want to make them permanent. In fact, the White House has said they want all provisions of the Build Back Better bill to be permanent. And so that's why Senator Graham and I asked CBO to score what they are telling the American people that they're passing. And as you can see, it's the largest spending bill in the history of the United States at $5 trillion. It adds $3 trillion to the debt. $3 trillion. And just this past week, the numbers came out that we are facing the highest inflation in 40 years. When you talk to the people back home who I represent in Missouri, they're struggling to put food on their table or clothes on their backs or gasoline in their cars. They care about those prices at the supermarket. And this administration and members of Congress on the Democrat side have said that inflation is only transitory until just this past week. The White House will now say that inflation is not transitory. The Federal Reserve even says inflation is not transitory. So we need to focus on inflation. The cure to inflation is not to spin your way out of inflation. And that's what $5 trillion of new money does. The CBO score on Friday came back with several provisions I think you should look at. One, the House Democrats said the child tax credit would cost $185 billion. The CBO score on Friday says it cost $1.6 trillion. $1.6 trillion. The CBO score on Friday also said that pre-K will cost $750 billion. But the House Democrats under the Build Back Better bill, they say it cost less than half of that. And then you look at the Obamacare subsidies. House Democrats in Build Back Better says it costs $74 billion. Under the CBO score on Friday, they say $220 billion. So are they not wanting to make these programs permanent? Are they wanting them to sunset? Or are they just creating a fiscal cliff? Are they creating a poverty trap for the people of America? Where that they get these programs and in a year they no longer have them. To me, it sounds like that they have two choices that they're either doing. They're either pulling the rug out from underneath the American public, or they're pulling the wool over the eyes of the American public. One or the other, we're going to have to know about. You know, people try to refer to this bill as the Build Back Better bill. Over on the House side, we refer to it to a couple different other Bs. This bill, as I said, bankrupts the economy. It's the largest spending bill in the history of the United States. It's the largest tax increase in the history of the United States. And it will add $3 trillion to the deficit, clearly bankrupting the economy. The second largest provision in this piece of legislation is a tax cut for the wealthiest of millionaires, the state and local tax deduction. It cost over $280 billion. That's their second largest provision. If you make $20 million, you get taxpayer paid family leave. If you make $500,000, you get thousands of dollars in electric vehicle subsidies for luxury cars. It benefits the wealthy. And as Senator Graham said, it adds numerous new programs to the federal government. The CBO score that came out Friday is talking about the 17 additional programs. This bill that passed the House of Representatives adds over 150 new federal programs. So it builds the Washington machine. As I said, this bill bankrupts the economy, it benefits the wealthy, and it builds the Washington machine. It is not too late. It is not too late for Speaker Pelosi to revisit this bill. In fact, she's not even sent it over to the Senate. She needs her members to vote under the true transparency of this bill, of what's accurate, and not under misrepresentation. Happy to yield back to the senator.
Questions?
Senator Graham,
Yes, sir.
part of the reason the child tax credit scored at $1.6 trillion last week is the expiration of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provision.
December.
25, yeah, which results from your own budget gimmick that is identical to the one Democrats are using. So isn't that kind of funny?
No, I don't think it's funny at all. The Democratic tax credit, I'm willing to talk to them about how you could help working people with a tax credit. Joe Manchin doesn't like this provision. That doesn't mean he's against tax credit. But Exhibit A as to the lie here is that they're pushing Joe, if you don't vote for Build Back Better, the tax credit goes away in December. Under the bill, it lasts for one more year. So what are they going to say at the end of that year? Joe, we need to extend it. If you extend the Democratic child tax credit for 10 years, it's $1.6 trillion. Count me in for trying to help families who are working with child tax credits, not this way. This is Exhibit A of how phony this whole process is.
On child tax credit.
Yeah, good. No, good.
You go ahead.
Would you agree that the budget process needs to be reformed here? Because it seems that when it's convenient, you set expiration dates so that bills can come in within budget. It turns out that those expiration dates are really transitory.
Yeah. So
fit the costs.
the
This is going to go on. We now have a $29 trillion national debt.
yeah.
This bill would raise it to, 33
Yeah.
or more. This kind of politics and budgeting seems unstoppable.
Well, the way to stop it is have the CBO score it and make an informed decision. If the American people want to support a $5 trillion bill, they need to be told it's $5 trillion. It's the largest spending bill in the history of the country. And they're trying to mask it to be $1.75 trillion when it's actually $5. Tax cuts. In 2017, we passed tax cuts. We as Republicans believe giving people back their money is a good thing. This bill takes more money out of the economy. It grows the government. I think will be incredibly inflationary. As to tax cut scores. You can't score beyond the 10-year window. We believe that cutting taxes stimulates the economy over time. You'll create more jobs, but the CBO is set up that you can't go beyond the 10-year window. So in 2017, I think cutting taxes jump-started the economy. We were doing very well into COVID. We've got the vaccine now, and hopefully we can get our footing with a new variant and keep the economy open. So what they have done here is they're lying to the American people about three things. The cost of the bill. By sunsetting these programs, and some of them there may be bipartisan support for, they've artificially reduced the cost, and they should vote again in the House based on the reality of the cost. They say it doesn't cost a penny. Read my lips. It costs $3 trillion. I don't know how many pennies that is. So quit the games, quit the gimmicks. And that's not me saying that. That is Senator Manchin. So when you stop the games, the shell games and the gimmicks, this bill, I think, is dead forever, or should be. No, we're done. Yeah, go ahead.
Question about the revenue gains here. Does this score here include any of the anticipated revenue gains? And also, how hard is it to anticipate those, because you're collecting revenue from programs you haven't even implemented yet?
If the CBO wants to supplement how this bill generates revenue, that's great. Apparently, they feel comfortable saying, with all the revenue components, is $3 trillion in deficit spending. But if you're going to raise a bunch more revenue, I'd like to know where it comes from. Who's going to pay? Where does the revenue come from? So I think they looked at the bill in terms of revenue generation, spending programs, in light of the fact they won't go away. And the reason Jason and I did that is that when you take the lie off the table that these programs go away, it doubles in cost. When you look at the effect of the deficit, including revenue in the bill, it has a $3 trillion unpaid for component.
So this does include revenue?
Yes. Yes.
How often have you spoken with Joe Manchin this week about this?
I spoke to Joe when the numbers came out. I haven't spoken to him since. So he was the first person I called when the CBO score came out. And let's show the chart of the other groups who did this. The Wharton School of Business looked at the cost of Build Back Better, assuming the programs did not sunset before CBO. And they found $4.6 trillion to be the true cost. Joe had been working with Wharton, unbeknownst to me, because he trusts them, and he said, would you look at this bill without the sunsets? Then we got the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget that is sort of seen by both parties as Maya McGinnis's group as being honest brokers. They looked at the bill without the sunsets and including the revenue. It is $4.8 trillion. So when CBO came back using the same methodologies, they actually went to 4.9. If you include interest, it's over $5 trillion. So when you say CBO is fake, you have to believe that Wharton School of Business is fake, that Maya McGinnis's Committee for Responsible Federal Budget is fake. I don't think Senator Manchin believes this is fake. So that'd be a good question. Joe, do you think the CBO score is fake? Do you think Wharton was fake? Do you think the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget is fake? Do you believe this bill is paid for? I think he would say no. So my conversations with him were short, but he was stunned that CBO would actually not only be in the ballpark, be a little bit higher. When it comes to the deficit, Wharton had 2.6, Committee for Responsible Federal Budget had 2.8, the CBO had $3 trillion. So I think what's happened here is that Joe is convinced he was right about the true cost of the bill. I think with the inflation numbers that came out Friday, and Larry Summers and others saying this is not transitory, that Senator Manchin is going to be a hard sell when it comes to voting for a bill that would be the largest bill in the history of the United States in terms of spending at a time of rampant inflation. But he will continue, I'm sure, to try to find some middle ground. there is no middle ground, I think, for Build Back Better. There may be some middle ground for some of the provisions that we can look at that we believe not to be inflationary, that can be rewritten in a fashion to do a better job. Yes, sir.
It sounds like you might be alluding to a bipartisan deal on a standalone child tax credit bill. The Democrats are talking about moving something, since Build Back Better might not be done in time for the January payment. So what would you accept a bill like that would be?
Well, I think that's a good discussion to have. I think both parties have been interested in helping working people with child care expenses, but not $1.6 trillion over 10 years, not the way they wrote it. So I guess what I'm saying as a Republican, and I'll let Jason speak to this in a moment, that there are some things that maybe we could find common ground on, but what we're being offered to vote on in the Senate and what they voted on in the House is a complete non-starter, is an inflationary bomb. It's a $3 trillion unpaid-for bill that will do far more harm to the economy than anything it could help.
Thank you, Senator Graham. I was proud to work with President Trump in doubling the child tax credit back in the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act. I served on the Ways and Means Committee. That was the provision that I pushed for. As you know, it went from $1,000 to $2,000. I think it's interesting. Don't get confused. What they're trying to extend is their temporary child tax credit from the first reconciliation bill in March. It's not the Tax Cut and Jobs Act from 2025 that expires. That goes to show that's another temporary program in their last reconciliation bill that was supposed to expire now, that they're now trying to not make temporary anymore, which proves what we've said here all along. And in that, also in that reconciliation bill, they took out the work requirements. As Senator Graham says, there is a bipartisan approach, I think, on both sides of the building of a child tax credit that helps working families and the working class.
If you brought back the work requirement, though, that's not going to work for Democrats, because the whole idea of having a continuous program would be, we don't want to exclude the millions of people whose income is beneath that $2,500 threshold from the Tax Cut and Jobs Act.
Well, they don't pay taxes.
Right.
That's why
Okay.
I think most Americans would appreciate a tax credit, but most Americans have to have a tax liability. But we have programs for people who work. Ronald Reagan started, what's it called? You seem smart. What's the program? Earned tax.
Earned income tax.
Yeah, that was an idea for people who worked but still didn't make enough money to pay taxes, that they got some help. So that program already exists. What Jason's talking about is a new program that's not what we did in 2017. And let's talk about, I'll speak for myself. I believe climate change is real. Electric vehicles are coming. There'll be a day in America where most cars are electric. That'll be good for the environment, and we need to put the infrastructure in place. We need to have a reasonable transition and not declare war on fossil fuels. We need to be able to extract fuels here at home so we don't have to buy fossil fuels from people who hate our guts. The tax credit for electrical vehicles in this bill is just unbelievably bad government. They increase tax credits for electric vehicles, but I think there's $4,500 of the $12,500, I can't remember the actual number, that you only get if you buy an electric vehicle made by a union plant, and that gives you one choice, the Chevy Volt, I believe. We're making BMWs in South Carolina and Volvos. They're making cars in West Virginia. So Build Back Better is offensive. I mean, if you really believed in the environment, what does it matter who makes the car? Why would you want to punish companies that came to America to create good jobs from Americans by taking a tax credit off the table and giving it to a union plant? Because they're trying to reward their political allies. This is another example of why this bill stinks. All right, one last question.
So we're talking about the policies here. I'm wondering, do you think that this is an effort to like radically reshape the way America is? I mean, and what are the most concerning policies when we talk about these?
It's good question. I think there is an effort by the liberal part of the party, which is now the dominant part of the party, to take this moment of having the House, the White House, and the Senate and dramatically reshape America. And the only thing that stops them is a united Republican Party. You got to remember, I'm one of 19 Republicans that worked with Democrats to pass a $1.2 trillion infrastructure package because I thought it made sense. Every Republican in the House and the Senate that I know of, certainly in the Senate, opposes Build Back Better. That ought to tell you a lot about the quality of the product. Why do we oppose it? We believe it's $5 trillion, not 1.75. We believe these programs are going to do more harm than good, grow the government, march us towards socialism. If you have a child in a religious daycare setting, the child care component of this bill is not going to be available to these organizations because of the regulations. They're going to mandate higher wages, which in turn will increase costs for the consumers, and they're going to put a lot of people out of business. It's an effort to take over child care as they want to do with health care. So yes, this is a road to socialism approach. And the Democratic Party is openly talking now about packing the court because they don't like the fact that the court is more conservative than they would like. Well, the way you fix that problem is you win elections. I have voted for Sotomayor and Kagan. I voted for just about everybody. But I'm never going to support expanding the court because that is the end of the court. Because when we get in charge, will we expand it yet again? So they're willing to do a lot of damage to the structure of America, and we need to stop them. And this is a fight worth having. If this bill ever became law, there is no turning back.
Just on the child tax credit, is it too late in the year now to find some way to keep the child tax credit alive into January?
The child tax credit we're talking about doesn't need to be extended. There's a bipartisan proposal that could be worked upon to help people who work with child tax credits.
I would just follow on to your comment and your question in the last. This bill, in my opinion, is all about more command and control on the lives of working class Americans. Americans are facing numerous crises, whether it's the border crisis, whether it's the inflation crisis, whether it's the energy crisis, whether it's a leadership crisis in the Oval Office. They're facing all kinds of crises, and this piece of legislation only makes it work. In this bill alone, there's over $300 billion to push people not to work. And we have help wanted signs all across America. We cannot find enough people. We have a supply chain crisis. And so this is the last thing that we need is for this administration, the Washington Democrats, to push this legislation to make working class Americans' lives even worse.
Thank y'all. We got to run. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.